Trophic level. The trophic level of an organism is the position it occupies in a food web. Within a food web, a food chain is a succession of organisms that eat other organisms and may, in turn, be eaten themselves. The trophic level of an organism is the number of steps it is from the start of the chain. A food web starts at trophic level 1 with primary producers such as plants, can move to herbivores at level 2, carnivores at level 3 or higher, and typically finish with apex predators at level 4 or 5. The path along the chain can form either a one-way flow or a part of a wider food web. Ecological communities with higher biodiversity form more complex trophic paths. First trophic level. The plants in this image, and the algae and phytoplankton in the lake, are primary producers. They take nutrients from the soil or the water, and manufacture their own food by photosynthesis, using energy from the sun. The word trophic derives from the Greek trophy, referring to food or nourishment. 1. History. The concept of trophic level was developed by Raymond Lindemann, 1942, based on the terminology of August Thienemann, 1926, producers, consumers, and reducers, modified to decomposers, by Lindemann. 2. 3. Overview. Consumer categories based on material eaten plant. Green shades are live, brown shades are dead, animal, red shades are live, purple shades are dead, or particulate, gray shades and feeding strategy gatherer, lighter shade of each color, minor, darker shade of each color. The three basic ways in which organisms get food are as producers, consumers, and decomposers. Producers, autotrophs, are typically plants or algae. Plants and algae do not usually eat other organisms, but pull nutrients from the soil or the ocean and manufacture their own food using photosynthesis. For this reason, they are called primary producers. In this way, it is energy from the sun that usually powers the base of the food chain. 4. An exception occurs in deep-sea hydrothermal ecosystems, where there is no sunlight. Here primary producers manufacture food through a process called chemosynthesis. 5. Consumers, heterotrophs, are species that cannot manufacture their own food and need to consume other organisms. Animals that eat primary producers, like plants, are called herbivores. Animals that eat other animals are called carnivores, and animals that eat both plants and other animals are called omnivores. Decomposers, detritivores, break down dead plant and animal material and wastes and release it again as energy and nutrients into the ecosystem for recycling. Decomposers, such as bacteria and fungi, mushrooms, feed on waste and dead matter, converting it into inorganic chemicals that can be recycled as mineral nutrients for plants to use again. Trophic levels can be represented by numbers, starting at level 1 with plants. Further trophic levels are numbered subsequently according to how far the organism is along the food chain. Level 1. Plants and algae make their own food and are called producers. Level 2. Herbivores eat plants and are called primary consumers. Level 3. Carnivores that eat herbivores are called secondary consumers. Level 4. Carnivores that eat other carnivores are called tertiary consumers. Apex predator. By definition, healthy adult apex predators have no predators, with members of their own species a possible exception, and are at the highest numbered level of their food web. Second trophic level. Rabbits eat plants at the first trophic level, so they are primary consumers. Third trophic level. Foxes eat rabbits at the second trophic level, so they are secondary consumers. Fourth trophic level. Golden eagles eat foxes at the third trophic level, so they are tertiary consumers. Decomposers. The fungi on this tree feed on dead matter, converting it back to nutrients that primary producers can use. In real-world ecosystems, there is more than one food chain for most organisms, since most organisms eat more than one kind of food or are eaten by more than one type of predator. A diagram that sets out the intricate network of intersecting and overlapping food chains for an ecosystem is called its food web. 6 decomposers are often left off food webs, but if included, they mark the end of a food chain. 6 thus food chains start with primary producers and end with decay and decomposers. Since decomposers recycle nutrients, leaving them so they can be reused by primary producers, they are sometimes regarded as occupying their own trophic level. 7. 8. The trophic level of a species may vary if it has a choice of diet. Virtually all plants and phytoplankton are purely phototrophic and are at exactly level 1.0. Many worms are at around 2.1, insects 2.2, jellyfish 3.0, birds 3.6. 9. A 2013 study estimates the average trophic level of human beings at 2.21, similar to pigs or anchovies. 10. This is only an average, and plainly both modern and ancient human eating habits are complex and vary greatly. For example, a traditional Inuit living on a diet consisting primarily of seals would have a trophic level of nearly 5. 11. Biomass transfer efficiency. An energy pyramid illustrates how much energy is needed as it flows upward to support the next trophic level. Only about 10% of the energy transferred between each trophic level is converted to biomass. In general, each trophic level relates to the one below it by absorbing some of the energy it consumes, and in this way can be regarded as resting on, or supported by, the next lower trophic level. Food chains can be diagrammed to illustrate the amount of energy that moves from one feeding level to the next in a food chain. This is called an energy pyramid. The energy transferred between levels can also be thought of as approximating to a transfer in biomass, so energy pyramids can also be viewed as biomass pyramids, picturing the amount of biomass that results at higher levels from biomass consumed at lower levels. However, when primary producers grow rapidly and are consumed rapidly, the biomass at any one moment may be low. For example, phytoplankton producer biomass can be low compared to the zooplankton consumer biomass in the same area of ocean. 12. The efficiency with which energy or biomass is transferred from one trophic level to the next is called the ecological efficiency. Consumers at each level convert on average only about 10% of the chemical energy in their food to their own organic tissue, the 10% law. For this reason, food chains rarely extend for more than 5 or 6 levels. At the lowest trophic level, the bottom of the food chain, plants convert about 1% of the sunlight they receive into chemical energy. It follows from this that the total energy originally present in the incident sunlight that is finally embodied in a tertiary consumer is about 0.001%. 7. Evolution. Both the number of trophic levels and the complexity of relationships between them evolve as life diversifies through time, the exception being intermittent mass extinction events. 13. Fractional trophic levels. Killer whales, orca, are apex predators, but they are divided into separate populations that hunt specific prey, such as tuna, small sharks, and seals. Food webs largely define ecosystems, and the trophic levels define the position of organisms within the webs. But these trophic levels are not always simple integers, because organisms often feed at more than one trophic level. 14, 15, for example, some carnivores also eat plants, and some plants are carnivores. A large carnivore may eat both smaller carnivores and herbivores. The bobcat eats rabbits, but the mountain lion eats both bobcats and rabbits. Animals can also eat each other. The bullfrog eats crayfish and crayfish eat young bullfrogs. The feeding habits of a juvenile animal, and, as a consequence, its trophic level, can change as it grows up. The fisheries scientist Daniel Pauly sets the values of trophic levels to 1 in plants and detritus, 2 in herbivores and detritivores primary consumers, 3 in secondary consumers, and so on. The definition of the trophic level, TL, for any consumer species is 8. Whereas the fractional trophic level of the prey J, and represents the fraction of J in the diet of I. That is, the consumer trophic level is 1 plus the weighted average of how much different trophic levels contribute to its food. In the case of marine ecosystems, the trophic level of most fish and other marine consumers takes a value between 2.0 and 5.0. The upper value, 5.0, is unusual, even for large fish, 16, though it occurs in apex predators of marine mammals, such as polar bears and orcas. 17. In addition to observational studies of animal behavior, and quantification of animal stomach contents, trophic level can be quantified through stable isotope analysis of animal tissues such as muscle, skin, hair, bone, collagen. This is because there is a consistent increase in the nitrogen isotopic composition at each trophic level caused by fractionations that occur with the synthesis of biomolecules. The magnitude of this increase in nitrogen isotopic composition is approximately 3.4 per mil. 18, 19. Mean trophic level. The mean trophic level of the world fisheries catch has steadily declined because many high trophic level fish, such as this tuna, have been overfished. In fisheries, the mean trophic level for the fisheries catch across an entire area or ecosystem is calculated for year Y as, whereas the annual catch of the species or group I in year Y, and is the trophic level for species I as defined above. 8. Fish at higher 8. Fish at higher trophic levels usually have a higher economic value, which can result in overfishing at the higher trophic levels. Earlier reports found precipitous declines in mean trophic level of fisheries catch, in a process known as fishing down the food web. 20. However, more recent work finds no relation between economic value and trophic level. 21. And that mean trophic levels in catches, surveys and stock assessments have not in fact declined, suggesting that fishing down the food web is not a global phenomenon. 22. However, Pauly et al. Note that trophic levels peaked at 3.4 in 1,970 inches the northwest and west central Atlantic, followed by a subsequent decline to 2.9 in 1994. They report a shift away from long-lived, piscivorous, high trophic level bottom fishes, such as cod and haddock, to short-lived, planktivorous, low trophic level invertebrates e.g., shrimp, and small, pelagic fish e.g., herring. This shift from high trophic level fishes to low trophic level invertebrates and fishes is a response to changes in the relative abundance of the preferred catch. They consider that this is part of the global fishery collapse, 1723, which finds an echo in the overfished Mediterranean Sea. 24. Humans have a mean trophic level of about 2.21, about the same as a pig or an anchovy. 25-26. Fib index. Since biomass transfer efficiencies are only about 10%, it follows that the rate of biological production is much greater at lower trophic levels than it is at higher levels. Fisheries catch, at least, to begin with, will tend to increase as the trophic level declines. At this point the fisheries will target species lower in the food web. 23. In 2000, this led Pauly and others to construct a fisheries imbalance index, usually called the Fib index. 27. The Fib index is defined, for any year Y, by 8. Whereas the catch at year Y is the mean trophic level of the catch at year Y is the catch. The mean trophic level of the catch at the start of the series being analyzed, and is the transfer efficiency of biomass or energy between trophic levels. The Fib index is stable, 0, over periods of time when changes in trophic levels are matched by appropriate changes in the catch in the opposite direction. The index increases if catches increase for any reason, e.g. higher fish biomass, or geographic expansion. 8. Such decreases explain the backward bending plots of trophic level versus catch originally observed by Pauly and others in 1998. 23. Tritrophic and other interactions. One aspect of trophic levels is called tritrophic interaction. Ecologists often restrict their research to two trophic levels as a way of simplifying the analysis. However, this can be misleading if tritrophic interactions, such as plant-herbivore-predator, are not easily understood by simply adding pairwise interactions plant-herbivore plus herbivore-predator, for example. Significant interactions can occur between the first trophic level, plant, and the third trophic level, a predator, in determining herbivore population growth, for example. Simple genetic changes may yield morphological variants in plants that then differ in their resistance to herbivores because of the effects of the plant architecture on enemies of the herbivore. 28 plants can also develop defenses against herbivores such as chemical defenses. Nutrient cycle. A nutrient cycle, or ecological recycling, is the movement and exchange of inorganic and organic matter back into the production of matter. Energy flow is a unidirectional and non-cyclic pathway, whereas the movement of mineral nutrients is cyclic. Mineral cycles include the carbon cycle, sulfur cycle, nitrogen cycle, water cycle, phosphorus cycle, oxygen cycle, among others that continually recycle along with other mineral nutrients into productive ecological nutrition. Composting within agricultural systems capitalizes upon the natural services of nutrient recycling in ecosystems. Bacteria, fungi, insects, earthworms, bugs, and other creatures dig and digest the compost into fertile soil. The minerals and nutrients in the soil is recycled back into the production of crops. The nutrient cycle is nature's recycling system. All forms of recycling have feedback loops that use energy in the process of putting material resources back into use. Recycling in ecology is regulated to a large extent during the process of decomposition. 1. Ecosystems employ biodiversity in the food webs that recycle natural materials, such as mineral nutrients, which includes water. Recycling in natural systems is one of the many ecosystem services that sustain and contribute to the well-being of human societies. 2, 3, 4. There is much overlap between the terms for the biogeochemical cycle and nutrient cycle. Most textbooks integrate the two and seem to treat them as synonymous terms. 5. However, the terms often appear independently. The nutrient cycle is more often used in direct reference to the idea of an intrasystem cycle, where an ecosystem functions as a unit. From a practical point, it does not make sense to assess a terrestrial ecosystem by considering the full column of air above it as well. Overview. As the great depths of Earth below it. While an ecosystem often has no clear boundary, as a working model it is practical to consider the functional community where the bulk of matter and energy transfer occurs. 6. Nutrient cycling occurs in ecosystems that participate in the larger biogeochemical cycles of the Earth through a system of inputs and outputs. 6. Nutrient cycle. A nutrient cycle, or ecological recycling, is the movement and exchange of inorganic and organic matter back into the production of matter. Energy flow is a unidirectional and non-cyclic pathway, whereas the movement of mineral nutrients is cyclic. Mineral cycles include the carbon cycle, sulfur cycle, nitrogen cycle, water cycle, phosphorus cycle, oxygen cycle, among others that continually recycle along with other mineral nutrients into productive ecological nutrition. Composting within agricultural systems capitalizes upon the natural services of nutrient recycling in ecosystems. Bacteria, fungi, insects, earthworms, bugs, and other creatures dig and digest the compost into fertile soil. The minerals and nutrients in the soil is recycled back into the production of crops. The nutrient cycle is nature's recycling system. All forms of recycling have feedback loops that use energy in the process of putting material resources back into use. Recycling in ecology is regulated to a large extent during the process of decomposition. 1. Ecosystems employ biodiversity in the food webs that recycle natural materials, such as mineral nutrients, which includes water. Recycling in natural systems is one of the many ecosystem services that sustain and contribute to the well-being of human societies. 2, 3, 4. There is much overlap between the terms for the biogeochemical cycle and nutrient cycle. Most textbooks integrate the two and seem to treat them as synonymous terms. 5. However, the terms often appear independently. The nutrient cycle is more often used in direct reference to the idea of an intrasystem cycle, where an ecosystem functions as a unit. From a practical point, it does not make sense to assess a terrestrial ecosystem by considering the full column of air above it as well. Overview. As the great depths of Earth below it. While an ecosystem often has no clear boundary, as a working model it is practical to consider the functional community where the bulk of matter and energy transfer occurs. 6. Nutrient cycling occurs in ecosystems that participate in the larger biogeochemical cycles of the Earth through a system of inputs and outputs. 6. 425. All systems recycle. The biosphere is a network of continually recycling materials and information in alternating cycles of convergence and divergence. As materials converge or become more concentrated they gain in quality, increasing their potentials to drive useful work in proportion to their concentrations relative to the environment. As their potentials are used, materials diverge, or become more dispersed in the landscape, only to be concentrated again at another time and place. 7. 2. Complete and closed loop. Nutrient cycle of a typical terrestrial ecosystem. Ecosystems are capable of complete recycling. Complete recycling means that 100% of the waste material can be reconstituted indefinitely. This idea was captured by Howard T. Odum when he penned that, "It is thoroughly demonstrated by ecological systems and geological systems that all the chemical elements in many organic substances can be accumulated by living systems from background crustal or oceanic concentrations without limit as to concentration so long as there is available solar or another source of potential energy." 829 In 1979 Nicholas Georgescu-Roegen proposed the fourth law of entropy stating that complete recycling is impossible. Despite Georgescu-Roegen's extensive intellectual contributions to the science of ecological economics, the fourth law has been rejected in line with observations of ecological recycling. 9-10 However, some authors state that complete recycling is impossible for technological waste. 11. Ecosystems execute closed-loop recycling where demand for the nutrients that adds to the growth of biomass exceeds supply within that system. There are regional and spatial differences in the rates of growth and exchange of materials, where some ecosystems may be in nutrient debt sinks where others will have extra supply sources. These differences relate to climate, topography, and geological history leaving behind different sources of parent material. 6-12 In terms of a food web, a cycle or loop is defined as a directed sequence of one or more links starting from, and ending at, the same species. 13-185 An example of this is the microbial food web in the ocean, where bacteria are exploited and controlled by protozoa, including heterotrophic microflagellates which are in turn exploited by ciliates. This grazing activity is accompanied by excretion of substances which are in turn used by the bacteria so that the system more or less operates in a closed circuit. 14-69-70 A large fraction of the elements composing living matter reside at any instant of time in the world's biota. Because the earthly pool of these elements is limited and the rates of exchange among the various components of the biota are extremely fast with respect to geological time, it is quite a simplified food web illustrating a three-trophic food chain, producers, herbivores, carnivores, linked to decomposers. The movement of mineral nutrients through the food chain, into the mineral nutrient pool, and back into the trophic system illustrates ecological recycling. The movement of energy, in contrast, is unidirectional and non-cyclic. 15-16 An example of ecological recycling occurs in the enzymatic digestion of cellulose. Cellulose, one of the most abundant organic compounds on Earth, is the major polysaccharide in plants where it is part of the cell walls. Cellulose-degrading enzymes participate in the natural, ecological recycling of plant material. 17 Different ecosystems can vary in their recycling rates of litter, which creates a complex feedback on factors such as the competitive dominance of certain plant species. Different rates and patterns of ecological recycling leaves a legacy of environmental effects with implications for the future evolution of ecosystems. 18. Ecological recycling is common in organic farming, where nutrient management is fundamentally different compared to agribusiness styles of soil management. Organic farms that employ ecosystem recycling to a greater extent support more species, increased levels of biodiversity, and have a different food web structure. 2021 Organic agricultural ecosystems rely on the services of biodiversity for the recycling of nutrients through soils instead of relying on the supplementation of synthetic fertilizers. 22-23 Ecological recycling. Evident that much of the same material is being incorporated again and again into different biological forms. This observation gives rise to the notion that, on the average, matter and some amounts of energy are involved in cycles. 19-219 The model for ecological recycling agriculture adheres to the following principles. Protection of biodiversity. Use of renewable energy. Recycling of plant nutrients. 24. Where produce from an organic farm leaves the farm gate for the market, the system becomes an open cycle and nutrients may need to be replaced through alternative methods. Ecosystem engineers. From the largest to the smallest of creatures, nutrients are recycled by their movement, by their wastes, and by their metabolic activities. This illustration shows an example of the whale pump that cycles nutrients through the layers of the oceanic water column. Whales can migrate to great depths to feed on bottom fish, such as sand lance amidites spp. And surface to feed on krill and plankton at shallower levels. The whale pump enhances growth and productivity in other parts of the ecosystem. 25. The persistent legacy of environmental feedback that is left behind by or as an extension of the ecological actions of organisms is known as niche construction or ecosystem engineering. Many species leave an effect even after their death, such as coral skeletons or the extensive habitat modifications to a wetland by a beaver, whose components are recycled and reused by descendants and other species living under a different selective regime through the feedback and agency of these legacy effects. Many species leave an effect even after their death, such as coral skeletons or the extensive habitat modifications to a wetland by a beaver, whose components are recycled and reused by descendants and other species living under a different selective regime through the feedback and agency of these legacy effects. 26-27 Ecosystem engineers can influence nutrient cycling efficiency rates through their actions. An illustration of an earthworm casting taken from Charles Darwin's publication on the movement of organic matter in soils through the ecological activities of worms. 28. Earthworms, for example, passively and mechanically alter the nature of soil environments. The bodies of dead worms passively contribute mineral nutrients to the soil. The worms also mechanically modify the physical structure of the soil as they crawl about bioturbation and digest on the molds of organic matter they pull from the soil litter. These activities transport nutrients into the mineral layers of soil. Worms discard wastes that create worm castings containing undigested materials where bacteria and other decomposers gain access to the nutrients. The earthworm is employed in this process and the production of the ecosystem depends on their capability to create feedback loops in the recycling process. 29-30 Shellfish are also ecosystem engineers because they 1. Filter suspended particles from the water column, 2. Remove excess nutrients from coastal bays through denitrification, 3. Serve as natural coastal buffers, absorbing wave energy and reducing erosion from boat wakes, sea level rise and storms, 4. Provide nursery habitat for fish that are valuable to coastal economies. 31. Fungi contribute to nutrient cycling, 32, and nutritionally rearrange patches of ecosystem creating niches for other organisms. 33. In that way fungi in growing dead wood allow xylophages to grow and develop, and xylophages, in turn, affect dead wood, contributing to wood decomposition and nutrient cycling in the forest floor. 34. History. Fallen logs are critical components of the nutrient cycle in terrestrial forests. Nurse logs form habitats for other creatures that decompose the materials and recycle the nutrients back into production. Fallen logs are critical components of the nutrient cycle in terrestrial forests. The worms also mechanically modify the physical structure of the soil as they crawl about biodirbation and digest on the molds of organic matter they pull from the soil litter. These activities transport nutrients into the mineral layers of soil. Worms discard wastes that create worm castings containing undigested materials where bacteria and other decomposers gain access to the nutrients. The earthworm is employed in this process and the production of the ecosystem depends on their capability to create feedback loops in the recycling process. 29-30. Shellfish are also ecosystem engineers because they 1. Filter suspended particles from the water column, 2. Remove excess nutrients from coastal bays through denitrification, 3. Serve as natural coastal buffers, absorbing wave energy and reducing erosion from boat wakes, sea level rise and storms, 4. Provide nursery habitat for fish that are valuable to coastal economies. 31. Fungi contribute to nutrient cycling, 32, and nutritionally rearrange patches of ecosystem creating niches for other organisms. 33. In that way fungi in growing dead wood allow xylophages to grow and develop, and xylophages, in turn, affect dead wood, contributing to wood decomposition and nutrient cycling in the forest floor. 34. History. Fallen logs are critical components of the nutrient cycle in terrestrial forests. Nurse logs form habitats for other creatures that decompose the materials and recycle the nutrients back into production. 35. Nutrient cycling has a historical foothold in the writings of Charles Darwin in reference to the decomposition actions of earthworms. Darwin wrote about the continued movement of the particles of Earth. 28, 36, 37. Even earlier, in 1749 Carl Linnaeus wrote in The Economy of Nature we understand the all-wise disposition of the Creator in relation to natural things, by which they are fitted to produce general ends, and reciprocal uses, in reference to the balance of nature in his book Oeconomia Natura. 38. In this book he captured the notion of ecological recycling. The reciprocal uses are the key to the whole idea, for the death and destruction of one thing should always be subservient to the restitution of another. Thus mold spurs the decay of dead plants to nourish the soil, and the earth then offers again to plants from its bosom what it has received from them. 39. The basic idea of a balance of nature, however, can be traced back to the Greeks, Democritus, Epicurus, and their Roman disciple Lucretius. 40. Following the Greeks, the idea of a hydrological cycle, water is considered a nutrient, was validated and quantified by Haley in 1687. Dumas and Boussingault, 1844, provided a key paper that is recognized by some to be the true beginning of biogeochemistry, where they talked about the cycle of organic life in great detail. 40-41. From 1836 to 1876, Jean-Baptiste Boussingault demonstrated the nutritional necessity of minerals and nitrogen for plant growth and development. Prior to this time influential chemists discounted the importance of mineral nutrients in soil. 42. Ferdinand Kohn is another influential figure. In 1872, Kohn described the cycle of life as the entire arrangement of nature, in which the dissolution of dead organic bodies provided the materials necessary for new life. The amount of material that could be molded into living beings was limited, he reasoned, so there must exist an eternal circulation, ewigem Kreislauf, that constantly converts the same particle of matter from dead bodies into living bodies. 43. 115-116. These ideas were synthesized in the master's research of Sergei Vinogradsky from 1881-1883. 43. Variations in terminology. In 1926 Vernadsky coined the term biogeochemistry as a sub-discipline of geochemistry. 40. However, the term nutrient cycle predates biogeochemistry in a pamphlet on silviculture in 1899. These demands by no means pass over the fact that at places where sufficient quantities of humus are available and where, in case of continuous decomposition of litter, a stable, nutrient humus is present, considerable quantities of nutrients are also available from the biogenic nutrient cycle for the standing timber. 44. 12. In 1898 there is a reference to the nitrogen cycle in relation to nitrogen-fixing microorganisms. 45. Other uses and variations on the terminology relating to the process of nutrient cycling appear throughout history. The term mineral cycle appears early in 1935 in reference to the importance of minerals in plant physiology. Ash is probably either built up into its permanent structure, or deposited in some way as waste in the cells, and so may not be free to re-enter the mineral cycle. 46. 301. The term nutrient recycling appears in a 1964 paper on the food ecology of the wood stork. While the periodic drying up and reflooding of the marshes creates special survival problems for organisms in the community, the fluctuating water levels favor rapid nutrient recycling and subsequent high rates of primary and secondary production. 47-97. The term natural cycling appears in a 1968 paper on the transportation of leaf litter and its chemical elements for consideration in fisheries management. Fluvial transport of tree litter from drainage basins is a factor in natural cycling of chemical elements and in the degradation of the land. 48-131. The term ecological recycling appears in a 1968 publication on future applications of ecology for the creation of different modules designed for living in extreme environments, such as space or under the sea. For our basic requirement of recycling vital resources, the oceans provide much more frequent ecological recycling than the land area. Fish and other organic populations have higher growth rates. Vegetation has less capricious weather problems for sea harvesting. 49. The term biorecycling appears in a 1976 paper on the recycling of organic carbon in oceans. Following the actualistic assumption, then, that biological activity is responsible for the source of dissolved organic material in the oceans, but is not important for its activities after death of the organisms and subsequent chemical changes which prevent its biorecycling, we can see no major difference in the behavior of dissolved organic matter between the prebiotic and postbiotic oceans. 50-414. Water is also a nutrient. 51. In this context, some authors also refer to precipitation recycling, which is the contribution of evaporation within a region to precipitation in that same region. 52. These variations on the theme of nutrient cycling continue to be used and all refer to processes that are part of the global biogeochemical cycles. However, authors tend to refer to natural, organic, ecological, or biorecycling in reference to the work of nature, such as it is used in organic farming or ecological agricultural systems. 24. Recycling in novel ecosystems. An endless stream of technological waste accumulates in different spatial configurations across the planet and becomes hazardous in our soils, our streams, and our oceans. 53-54. This idea was similarly expressed in 1954 by ecologist Paul Sears. We do not know whether to cherish the forest as a source of essential raw materials and other benefits or to remove it for the space it occupies. We expect a river to serve as both vein and artery carrying away waste but bringing usable material in the same channel. Nature long ago discarded the nonsense of carrying poisonous wastes and nutrients in the same vessels. 55-960. Ecologists use population ecology to model contaminants as competitors or predators. 56. Rachel Carson was an ecological pioneer in this area as her book Silent Spring inspired research into biomagnification and brought to the world's attention the unseen pollutants moving into the food chains of the planet. 57. In contrast to the planet's natural ecosystems, technology, or techno-ecosystems, is not reducing its impact on planetary resources. 58-59. Only 7% of total plastic waste, adding up to millions upon millions of tons, is being recycled by industrial systems. The 93% that never makes it into the industrial recycling stream is presumably absorbed by natural recycling systems. 60. In contrast and over extensive lengths of time, billions of years, ecosystems have maintained a consistent balance with production roughly equaling respiratory consumption rates. The balanced recycling efficiency of nature means that production of decaying waste material has exceeded rates of recyclable pesticides soon spread through everything in the ecosphere, both human technosphere and non-human biosphere, returning from the out there, of natural environments back into plant, animal, and human bodies situated at the, in here, of artificial environments with unintended, unanticipated, and unwanted effects. By using zoological, toxicological, epidemiological, and ecological insights, Carson generated a new sense of how the environment might be seen. 62. Consumption into food chains equal to the global stocks of fossilized fuels that escape the chain of decomposition. 61. Microplastics and nanosilver materials flowing and cycling through ecosystems from pollution and discarded technology are among a growing list of emerging ecological concerns. 63. For example, unique assemblages of marine microbes have been found to digest plastic accumulating in the world's oceans. The term ecological recycling appears in a 1968 publication on future applications of ecology for the creation of different modules designed for living in extreme environments, such as space or under the sea. For our basic requirement of recycling vital resources, the oceans provide much more frequent ecological recycling than the land area. Fish and other organic populations have higher growth rates. Vegetation has less capricious weather problems for sea harvesting. 49. The term biorecycling appears in a 1976 paper on the recycling of organic carbon in oceans. Following the actualistic assumption, then, that biological activity is responsible for the source of dissolved organic material in the oceans, but is not important for its activities after death of the organisms and subsequent chemical changes which prevent its biorecycling, we can see no major difference in the behavior of dissolved organic matter between the prebiotic and postbiotic oceans. 50-414. Water is also a nutrient. 51. In this context, some authors also refer to precipitation recycling, which is the contribution of evaporation within a region to precipitation in that same region. 52. These variations on the theme of nutrient cycling continue to be used and all refer to processes that are part of the global biogeochemical cycles. However, authors tend to refer to natural, organic, ecological, or biorecycling in reference to the work of nature, such as it is used in organic farming or ecological agricultural systems. 24. Recycling in novel ecosystems. An endless stream of technological waste accumulates in different spatial configurations across the planet and becomes hazardous in our soils, our streams, and our oceans. 53-54 This idea was similarly expressed in 1954 by ecologist Paul Sears. We do not know whether to cherish the forest as a source of essential raw materials and other benefits or to remove it for the space it occupies. We expect a river to serve as both vein and artery, carrying away waste but bringing usable material in the same channel. Nature long ago discarded the nonsense of carrying poisonous wastes and nutrients in the same vessels. 55-960 Ecologists use population ecology to model contaminants as competitors or predators. 56 Rachel Carson was an ecological pioneer in this area as her book Silent Spring inspired research into biomagnification and brought to the world's attention the unseen pollutants moving into the food chains of the planet. 57. In contrast to the planet's natural ecosystems, technology, or techno-ecosystems, is not reducing its impact on planetary resources. 58-59 Only 7% of total plastic waste, adding up to millions upon millions of tons, is being recycled by industrial systems. The 93% that never makes it into the industrial recycling stream is presumably absorbed by natural recycling systems. 60 In contrast, and over extensive lengths of time, billions of years, ecosystems have maintained a consistent balance with production roughly equaling respiratory consumption rates. The balanced recycling efficiency of nature means that production of decaying waste material has exceeded rates of recyclable pesticides soon spread through everything in the ecosphere, both human, technosphere, and non-human. Biosphere returning from the out there, of natural environments back into plant, animal, and human bodies situated at the, in here, of artificial environments with unintended, unanticipated, and unwanted effects. By using zoological, toxicological, epidemiological, and ecological insights, Carson generated a new sense of how the environment might be seen. 62. Consumption into food chains equal to the global stocks of fossilized fuels that escaped the chain of decomposition. 61. Microplastics and nanosilver materials flowing and cycling through ecosystems from pollution and discarded technology are among a growing list of emerging ecological concerns. 63. For example, unique assemblages of marine microbes have been found to digest plastic accumulating in the world's oceans. 64. Discarded technology is absorbed into soils and creates a new class of soils called technosoils. 65. Human wastes in the Anthropocene are creating new systems of ecological recycling, novel ecosystems that have to contend with the mercury cycle and other synthetic materials that are streaming into the biodegradation chain. 66. Microorganisms have a significant role in the removal of synthetic organic compounds from the environment, empowered by recycling mechanisms that have complex biodegradation pathways. The effect of synthetic materials, such as nanoparticles and microplastics, on ecological recycling systems is listed as one of the major concerns for ecosystems in this century. 63-67. Technological recycling. Recycling in human industrial systems, or techno-ecosystems, differs from ecological recycling in scale, complexity, and organization. Industrial recycling systems do not focus on the employment of ecological food webs to recycle waste back into different kinds of marketable goods, but primarily employ people and technodiversity instead. Some researchers have questioned the premise behind these and other kinds of technological solutions under the banner of eco-efficiency, are limited in their capability, harmful to ecological processes, and dangerous in their hyped capabilities. 11-68 Many techno-ecosystems are competitive and parasitic toward natural ecosystems. 61-69 Food web or biologically based. Recycling includes metabolic recycling, nutrient recovery, storage, etc. And ecosystem recycling, leaching and in situ organic matter mineralization, either in the water column, in the sediment surface, or within the sediment. 70-243. Biogeochemical cycle. A biogeochemical cycle, or more generally a cycle of matter, 1. Is the movement and transformation of chemical elements and compounds between living organisms, the atmosphere, and the Earth's crust. Major biogeochemical cycles include the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, and the water cycle. In each cycle, the chemical element or molecule is transformed and cycled by living organisms and through various geological forms and reservoirs, including the atmosphere, the soil, and the oceans. It can be thought of as the pathway by which a chemical substance cycles, is turned over or moves through, the biotic compartment and the abiotic compartments of Earth. The biotic compartment is the biosphere and the abiotic compartments are the atmosphere, lithosphere, and hydrosphere. For example, in the carbon cycle, atmospheric carbon dioxide is absorbed by plants through photosynthesis, which converts it into organic compounds that are used by organisms for energy and growth. Carbon is then released back into the atmosphere through respiration and decomposition. Additionally, carbon is stored in fossil fuels and is released into the atmosphere through human activities such as burning fossil fuels. In the nitrogen cycle, atmospheric nitrogen gas is converted by plants into usable forms such as ammonia and nitrates through the process of nitrogen fixation. These compounds can be used by other organisms, and nitrogen is returned to the atmosphere through denitrification and other processes. In the water cycle, the universal solvent water evaporates from land and oceans to form clouds in the atmosphere, and then precipitates back to different parts of the planet. Precipitation can seep into the ground and become part of groundwater systems used by plants and other organisms, or can run off the surface to form lakes and rivers. Subterranean water can then seep into the ocean along with river discharges, rich with dissolved and particulate organic matter and other nutrients. There are biogeochemical cycles for many other elements, such as for oxygen, hydrogen, phosphorus, calcium, iron, sulfur, mercury and selenium. There are also cycles for molecules, such as water and silica. In addition, there are macroscopic cycles such as the rock cycle, and human-induced cycles for synthetic compounds such as for polychlorinated biphenyls (PCBs). In some cycles there are geological reservoirs where substances can remain or be sequestered for long periods of time. Biogeochemical cycles involve. There are also cycles for molecules, such as water and silica. In addition, there are macroscopic cycles such as the rock cycle, and human-induced cycles for synthetic compounds such as for polychlorinated biphenyls (PCBs). In some cycles there are geological reservoirs where substances can remain or be sequestered for long periods of time. Biogeochemical cycles involve the interaction of biological, geological, and chemical processes. Biological processes include the influence of microorganisms, which are critical drivers of biogeochemical cycling. Microorganisms have the ability to carry out wide ranges of metabolic processes essential for the cycling of nutrients and chemicals throughout global ecosystems. Without microorganisms, many of these processes would not occur, with significant impact on the functioning of land and ocean ecosystems and the planet's biogeochemical cycles as a whole. Changes to cycles can impact human health. The cycles are interconnected and play important roles regulating climate, supporting the growth of plants, phytoplankton and other organisms, and maintaining the health of ecosystems generally. Human activities such as burning fossil fuels and using large amounts of fertilizer can disrupt cycles, contributing to climate change, pollution, and other environmental problems. Overview. Generalized biogeochemical cycle 2. Simplified version of the nitrogen cycle. Energy flows directionally through ecosystems, entering as sunlight or inorganic molecules for chemoautotrophs and leaving as heat during the many transfers between trophic levels. However, the matter that makes up living organisms is conserved and recycled. The 6 most common elements associated with organic molecules, carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur, take a variety of chemical forms and may exist for long periods in the atmosphere, on land, in water, or beneath the Earth's surface. Geologic processes, such as weathering, erosion, water drainage, and the subduction of the continental plates, all play a role in this recycling of materials. Because geology and chemistry have major roles in the study of this process, the recycling of inorganic matter between living organisms and their environment is called a biogeochemical cycle. 3. The 6 aforementioned elements are used by organisms in a variety of ways. Hydrogen and oxygen are found in water and organic molecules, both of which are essential to life. Carbon is found in all organic molecules, whereas nitrogen is an important component of nucleic acids and proteins. Phosphorus is used to make nucleic acids and the phospholipids that comprise biological membranes. Sulfur is critical to the three-dimensional shape of proteins. The cycling of these elements is interconnected. For example, the movement of water is critical for leaching sulfur and phosphorus into rivers which can then flow into oceans. Minerals cycle through the biosphere between the biotic and abiotic components and from one organism to another. 4. Ecological systems. Ecosystems have many biogeochemical cycles operating as a part of the system, for example, the water cycle, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, etc. All chemical elements occurring in organisms are part of biogeochemical cycles. In addition to being a part of living organisms, these chemical elements also cycle through abiotic factors of ecosystems such as water, hydrosphere, land, lithosphere, and/or the air, atmosphere. 5. The living factors of the planet can be referred to collectively as the biosphere. All the nutrients, such as carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur, used in ecosystems by living organisms are a part of a closed system. Therefore, these chemicals are recycled instead of being lost and replenished constantly, such as in an open system. 5. The major parts of the biosphere are connected by the flow of chemical elements and compounds in biogeochemical cycles. In many of these cycles, the biota plays an important role. Matter from the Earth's interior is released by volcanoes. The atmosphere exchanges some compounds and elements rapidly with the biota and oceans. Exchanges of materials between rocks, soils, and the oceans are generally slower by comparison. 2. The flow of energy in an ecosystem is an open system. The sun constantly gives the planet energy in the form of light while it is eventually used and lost in the form of heat throughout the trophic levels of a food web. Carbon is used to make carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, the major sources of food energy. These compounds are oxidized to release carbon dioxide, which can be captured by plants to make organic compounds. The chemical reaction is powered by the light energy of sunshine. Sunlight is required to combine carbon with hydrogen and oxygen into an energy source, but ecosystems in the deep sea, where no sunlight can penetrate, obtain energy from sulfur. Hydrogen sulfide near hydrothermal vents can be utilized by organisms such as the giant tube worm. In the sulfur cycle, sulfur can be forever recycled as a source of energy. Energy can be released through the oxidation and reduction of sulfur compounds, e.g., oxidizing elemental sulfur to sulfite and then to sulfate. Examples of major biogeochemical processes. The oceanic whale pump showing how whales cycle nutrients through the ocean water column. The implications of shifts in the global carbon cycle due to human activity are concerning scientists. 6. Although the Earth constantly receives energy from the Sun, its chemical composition is essentially fixed, as the additional matter is only occasionally added by meteorites. Because this chemical composition is not replenished like energy, all processes that depend on these chemicals must be recycled. These cycles include both the living biosphere and the non-living lithosphere, atmosphere, and hydrosphere. Biogeochemical cycles can be contrasted with geochemical cycles. The latter deals only with crustal and subcrustal reservoirs, even though some process from both overlap. Measurement units. Global biogeochemical box models usually measure reservoir masses in petagrams pg. Flow fluxes in petagrams per year pg year -1. The residence or turnover time is the average time material spends resident in the reservoir. If the reservoir is in a steady state, this is the same as the time it takes to fill or drain the reservoir. Thus, if tau is the turnover time, then tau equals ms. 25. The equation describing the rate of change of content in a reservoir is: when two or more reservoirs are connected, the material can be regarded as cycling between the reservoirs, and there can be predictable patterns to the cyclic flow. 25. More complex multi-box models are usually solved using numerical techniques. Simple 3-box model. Simplified budget of ocean carbon flows. 26. The diagram on the left shows a simplified budget of ocean carbon flows. It is composed of 3 simple interconnected box models, 1 for the euphotic zone, 1 for the ocean interior or dark ocean, and 1 for ocean sediments. In the euphotic zone, net phytoplankton production is about 50 petagrams C each year. About 10 petagrams is exported to the ocean interior while the other 40 petagrams is respired. Organic carbon degradation occurs as particles, marine snow, settle through the ocean interior. Only 2 petagrams eventually arrives at the seafloor, while the other 8 petagrams is respired in the dark ocean. In sediments, the timescale available for degradation increases by orders of magnitude, with the result that 90% of the organic carbon delivered is degraded and only 0.2 petagrams C year -1 is eventually buried and transferred from the biosphere to the geosphere. 26. More complex model with many interacting boxes. Export and burial rates of terrestrial organic carbon in the ocean. 27. The diagram on the right shows a more complex model with many interacting boxes. Reservoir masses here represents carbon stocks, measured in PGC. Carbon exchange fluxes, measured in PGC year -1, occur between the atmosphere and its 2 major sinks, the land and the ocean. The black numbers and arrows indicate the reservoir mass and exchange fluxes estimated for the year 1750, just before the Industrial Revolution. The red arrows and associated numbers indicate the annual flux changes due to anthropogenic activities, averaged over the 2000-2009 time period. They represent how the carbon cycle has changed since 1750. Red numbers in the reservoirs represent the cumulative changes in anthropogenic carbon since the start of the industrial period, 1750. 2011, 28, 29, 27. Fast and slow cycles. The fast cycle operates through the biosphere, including exchanges between land, atmosphere, and oceans. The yellow numbers are natural fluxes of carbon in billions of tons, gigatons per year. Red are human contributions and white are stored carbon. 30. The slow cycle operates through rocks, including volcanic and tectonic activity. There are fast and slow biogeochemical cycles. Fast cycle operate in the biosphere and slow cycles operate in rocks. Faster biological cycles can complete within years, moving substances from atmosphere to biosphere, then back to the atmosphere. Slower geological cycles can take millions of years to complete, moving substances through the Earth's crust between rocks, soil, ocean and atmosphere. 31. As an example, the fast carbon cycle is illustrated in the diagram below on the left. This cycle involves relatively short-term biogeochemical processes between the environment and living organisms in the biosphere. It includes movements of carbon between the atmosphere and terrestrial and marine ecosystems, as well as soils and seafloor sediments. The fast cycle includes annual cycles involving photosynthesis and decadal cycles involving vegetative growth and decomposition. The reactions of the fast carbon cycle to human activities will determine many of the more immediate impacts of climate change. 32, 33, 34, 35. The slow cycle is illustrated in the diagram above on the right. It involves medium to long-term geochemical processes belonging to the rock cycle. The exchange between the ocean and atmosphere can take centuries, and the weathering of rocks can take millions of years. Carbon in the ocean precipitates to the ocean floor where it can form sedimentary rock and be subducted into the Earth's mantle. Mountain building processes result in the return of this geologic carbon to the Earth's surface. There the rocks are weathered and carbon is returned to the atmosphere by degassing into the ocean by rivers. Other geologic carbon returns to the ocean through the hydrothermal emission of calcium ions. In a given year between 10 and 100 million tons of carbon moves around this slow cycle. This includes volcanoes returning geologic carbon directly to the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide. However, this is less than 1% of the carbon dioxide put into the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels. 31, 32. Deep cycles. The terrestrial subsurface is the largest reservoir of carbon on Earth, containing 14 to 135 pg of carbon, 36, and 2-19% of all biomass. 37. Microorganisms drive organic and inorganic compound transformations in this environment and thereby control biogeochemical cycles. Current knowledge of the microbial ecology of the subsurface is primarily based on 16S ribosomal RNA, rRNA gene sequences. Recent estimates show that less than 8% of 16S rRNA sequences in public databases derive from subsurface organisms, 38, and only a small fraction of those are represented by genomes or isolates. Thus, there is remarkably little reliable information about microbial metabolism in the subsurface. Further, little is known about how organisms in subsurface ecosystems are metabolically interconnected. Some cultivation-based studies of syntrophic consortia 39, 40, 41, and small-scale metagenomic analyses of natural communities 42, 43, 44 suggest that organisms are linked via metabolic handoffs, the transfer of redox reaction products of one organism to another. However, no complex environments have been dissected completely enough to resolve the metabolic interaction networks that underpin them. This restricts the ability of biogeochemical models to capture key aspects of the carbon and other nutrient cycles. 45. New approaches such as genome-resolved metagenomics, an approach that can yield a comprehensive set of draft and even complete genomes for organisms without the requirement for laboratory isolation, 42, 46, 47, have the potential to provide this critical level of understanding of biogeochemical processes. 48. Carbon cycle. Oxygen cycle. Nitrogen cycle. Nutrient cycle. Chloroplasts conduct photosynthesis in plant cells and other eukaryotic organisms. Kerogen cycle 51, 52. Coal is a reservoir of carbon. Some of the more well-known biogeochemical cycles are shown below. Many biogeochemical cycles are currently being studied for the first time. Climate change and human impacts are drastically changing the speed, intensity, and balance of these relatively unknown cycles, which include the mercury cycle, 49, and the human-caused cycle of PCBs, 50. Some examples: Environment Portal, Ecology Portal, Earth Sciences Portal. Biogeochemical cycles always involve active equilibrium states, a balance in the cycling of the element between compartments. However, overall balance may involve compartments distributed on a global scale. As biogeochemical cycles describe the movements of substances on the entire globe, the study of these is inherently multidisciplinary. The carbon cycle may be related to research in ecology and atmospheric sciences. 53. Biochemical dynamics would also be related to the fields of geology and pedology. 54. Carbonate silicate cycle ecological recycling grade acceleration hydrogen cycle redox gradient 1. CK12 Foundation, 2.0, Section 24.7, Primary Lesson, Cycles of Matter Chumbio. Flexbooks.ck12.org. Retrieved the 21st of March 2022. Primary production. In ecology, primary production is the synthesis of organic compounds from atmospheric or aqueous carbon dioxide. It principally occurs through the process of photosynthesis, which uses light as its source of energy, but it also occurs through chemosynthesis, which uses the oxidation or reduction of inorganic chemical compounds as its source of energy. Almost all life on Earth relies directly or indirectly on primary production. The organisms responsible for primary production are known as primary producers or autotrophs, and form the base of the food chain. In terrestrial ecoregions, these are mainly plants, while in aquatic ecoregions algae predominate in this role. Ecologists distinguish primary production as either net or gross, the former accounting for losses to processes such as cellular respiration, the latter not. Global oceanic and terrestrial photoautotroph abundance, from September 1997 to August 2000. As an estimate of autotroph biomass, it is only a rough indicator of primary production potential, and not an actual estimate of it. Provided by the CYFS project, NASA Goddard Space Flight Center and GOI. Overview. Primary production is the production of chemical energy in organic compounds by living organisms. The main source of this energy is sunlight, but a minute fraction of primary production is driven by lithotrophic organisms using the chemical energy of inorganic molecules. The Calvin cycle of photosynthesis. Regardless of its source, this energy is used to synthesize complex organic molecules from simpler inorganic compounds such as carbon dioxide, CO2, and water, H2O. The following two equations are simplified representations of photosynthesis top, and one form of chemosynthesis bottom, CO2 plus H2O plus light right pointing arrow CH2O plus O2. CO2 plus O2 plus 4H2S right pointing arrow CH2O plus 4S plus 3H2O. In both cases, the endpoint is a polymer of reduced carbohydrate, CH2ON, typically molecules such as glucose or other sugars. In both cases, the endpoint is a polymer of reduced carbohydrate, CH2ON, typically molecules such as glucose or other sugars. These relatively simple molecules may be then used to further synthesize more complicated molecules, including proteins, complex carbohydrates, lipids, and nucleic acids, or be respired to perform work. Consumption of primary producers by heterotrophic organisms, such as animals, then transfers these organic molecules and the energy stored within them up the food web, fueling all of the Earth's living systems. Gross primary production and net primary production. Gross primary production (GPP) is the amount of chemical energy, typically expressed as carbon biomass, that primary producers create in a given length of time. Some fraction of this fixed energy is used by primary producers for cellular respiration and maintenance of existing tissues, i.e., growth respiration, and maintenance respiration. 1. 2. The remaining fixed energy, i.e., mass of photosynthesis, is referred to as net primary production, NPP. NPP equals GPP. Respiration by plants. Net primary production is the rate at which all the autotrophs in an ecosystem produce net useful chemical energy. Net primary production is available to be directed toward growth and reproduction of primary producers. As such, it is available for consumption by herbivores. Both gross and net primary production are typically expressed in units of mass per unit area per unit time interval. In terrestrial ecosystems, mass of carbon per unit area per year, GCM-2 years -1, is most often used as a unit of measurement. Note that a distinction is sometimes drawn between production and productivity, with the former the quantity of material produced, GCM-2, the latter the rate at which it is produced, GCM-2 years -1, but these terms are more typically used interchangeably. Terrestrial production. This animation shows Earth's monthly terrestrial net primary productivity from 2000 to 2013. Values range from near 0 grams of carbon per square meter per day, tan, to 6.5 grams per square meter per day, dark green. A negative value means decomposition or respiration overpowered carbon absorption. More carbon was released to the atmosphere than the plants took in. In mid-latitudes, productivity obviously interacts with seasonal change, with productivity peaking in each hemisphere's summer. The data come from the Moderate Resolution Imaging Spectroradiometer (MODIS) on NASA's Terra satellite. 3. On the land, almost all primary production is now performed by vascular plants, with a small fraction coming from algae and non-vascular plants such as mosses and liverworts. Before the evolution of vascular plants, non-vascular plants likely played a more significant role. Primary production on land is a function of many factors, but principally local hydrology and temperature. The latter co-varies to an extent with light, specifically photosynthetically active radiation, PAR, the source of energy for photosynthesis. While plants cover much of the Earth's surface, they are strongly curtailed wherever temperatures are too extreme or where necessary plant resources, principally water and PAR, are limiting, such as deserts or polar regions. Water is consumed in plants by the processes of photosynthesis, see above, and transpiration. The latter process, which is responsible for about 90% of water use, is driven by the evaporation of water from the leaves of plants. Transpiration allows plants to transport water and mineral nutrients from the soil to growth regions, and also cools the plant. Diffusion of water vapor out of a leaf, the force that drives transpiration, is regulated by structures known as stomata. These structures also regulate the diffusion of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere into the leaf, such that decreasing water loss by partially closing stomata also decreases carbon dioxide gain. Certain plants use alternative forms of photosynthesis, called crassylation acid metabolism, CAM, and C4. These employ physiological and anatomical adaptations to increase water use efficiency and allow increased primary production to take place under conditions that would normally limit carbon fixation by C3 plants, the majority of plant species. As shown in the animation, the boreal forests of Canada and Russia experience high productivity in June and July and then a slow decline through fall and winter. Year-round, tropical forests in South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, and Indonesia have high productivity, not surprising with the abundant sunlight, warmth, and rainfall. However, even in the tropics, there are variations in productivity over the course of the year. For example, the Amazon basin exhibits especially high productivity from roughly August through October, the period of the area's dry season. Because the trees have access to a plentiful supply of groundwater that builds up in the rainy season, they grow better when the rainy skies clear and allow more sunlight to reach the forest. 3. Oceanic production. Marine diatoms, an example of planktonic microalgae. In a reversal of the pattern on land, in the oceans, almost all photosynthesis is performed by algae, with a small fraction contributed by vascular plants and other groups. Algae encompass a diverse range of organisms, ranging from single floating cells to attached seaweeds. They include photoautotrophs from a variety of groups. Eubacteria are important photosynthesizers in both oceanic and terrestrial ecosystems, and while some archaea are phototrophic, none are known to utilize oxygen-evolving photosynthesis. 4. A number of eukaryotes are significant contributors to primary production in the ocean, including green algae, brown algae and red algae, and a diverse group of unicellular groups. Vascular plants are also represented in the ocean by groups such as the seagrasses. Unlike terrestrial ecosystems, the majority of primary production in the ocean is performed by free-living microscopic organisms called phytoplankton. Larger autotrophs, such as the seagrasses and macroalgae, seaweeds, are generally confined to the littoral zone and adjacent shallow waters, where they can attach to the underlying substrate but still be within the photic zone. There are exceptions, such as sargassum, but the vast majority of free-floating production takes place within microscopic organisms. Differences in relative photosynthesis between plankton species under different irradiance. The factors limiting primary production in the ocean are also very different from those on land. The availability of water, obviously, is not an issue, though its salinity can be. Similarly, temperature, while affecting metabolic rates, CQ10, ranges less widely in the ocean than on land because the heat capacity of seawater buffers temperature changes, and the formation of sea ice insulates it at lower temperatures. However, the availability of light, the source of energy for photosynthesis, and mineral nutrients, the building blocks for new growth, play crucial roles in regulating primary production in the ocean. 5. Available Earth system models suggest that ongoing ocean biogeochemical changes could trigger reductions in ocean NPP between 3% and 10% of current values depending on the emission scenario. 6. Light. A kelp forest, an example of attached macroalgae. The sunlit zone of the ocean is called the photic zone or euphotic zone. This is a relatively thin layer, 10-100 m, near the ocean's surface where there is sufficient light for photosynthesis to occur. For practical purposes, the thickness of the photic zone is typically defined by the depth at which light reaches 1% of its surface value. Light is attenuated down the water column by its absorption or scattering by the water itself, and by dissolved or particulate material within it, including phytoplankton. Net photosynthesis in the water column is determined by the interaction between the photic zone and the mixed layer. Turbulent mixing by wind energy at the ocean's surface homogenizes the water column vertically until the turbulence dissipates, creating the aforementioned mixed layer. The deeper the mixed layer, the lower the average amount of light intercepted by phytoplankton within it. The mixed layer can vary from being shallower than the photic zone, to being much deeper than the photic zone. When it is much deeper than the photic zone, this results in phytoplankton spending too much time in the dark for net growth to occur. The maximum depth of the mixed layer in which net growth can occur is called the critical depth. As long as there are adequate nutrients available, net primary production occurs whenever the mixed layer is shallower than the critical depth. Both the magnitude of wind mixing and the availability of light at the ocean's surface are affected across a range of space and time scales. The most characteristic of these is the seasonal cycle caused by the consequences of the Earth's axial tilt, although wind magnitudes additionally have strong spatial components. Consequently, primary production in temperate regions such as the North Atlantic is highly seasonal, varying with both incident light at the water's surface, reduced in winter, and the degree of mixing, increased in winter. In tropical regions, such as the gyres in the middle of the major basins, light may only vary slightly across the year, and mixing may only occur episodically, such as during large storms or hurricanes. Nutrients. Annual mean sea surface nitrate for the world ocean. Data from the World Ocean Atlas 2009, OAA.gov/OC5/WOA09/PR_WOA09.html. Mixing also plays an important role in the limitation of primary production by nutrients. Inorganic nutrients, such as nitrate, phosphate and silicic acid are necessary for phytoplankton to synthesize their cells and cellular machinery. Because of gravitational sinking of particulate material, such as plankton, dead or fecal material, nutrients are constantly lost from the photic zone, and are only replenished by mixing or upwelling of deeper water. This is exacerbated where summertime solar heating and reduced winds increases vertical stratification and leads to a strong thermocline, since this makes it more difficult for wind mixing to entrain deeper water. Consequently, between mixing events, primary production and the resulting processes that leads to sinking particulate material constantly acts to consume nutrients in the mixed layer, and in many regions this leads to nutrient exhaustion and decreased mixed layer production in the summer even in the presence of abundant light. However, as long as the photic zone is deep enough, primary production may continue below the mixed layer where light-limited growth rates mean that nutrients are often more abundant. Iron. Another factor relatively recently discovered to play a significant role in oceanic primary production is the micronutrient iron. 7th, this is used as a cofactor in enzymes involved in processes such as nitrate reduction and nitrogen fixation. A major source of iron to the oceans is dust from the Earth's deserts, picked up and delivered by the wind as aeolian dust. In regions of the ocean that are distant from deserts or that are not reached by dust-carrying winds, for example, the Southern and North Pacific Oceans, the lack of iron can severely limit the amount of primary production that can occur. These areas are sometimes known as HNLC, high nutrient, low chlorophyll regions, because the scarcity of iron both limits phytoplankton growth and leaves a surplus of other nutrients. Some scientists have suggested introducing iron to these areas as a means of increasing primary productivity and sequestering carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. 8. Measurement. The methods for measurement of primary production vary depending on whether gross versus net production is the desired measure, and whether terrestrial or aquatic systems are the focus. Gross production is almost always harder to measure than net, because of respiration, which is a continuous and ongoing process that consumes some of the products of primary production, i.e. sugars, before they can be accurately measured. Also, terrestrial ecosystems are generally more difficult because a substantial proportion of total productivity is shunted to below-ground organs and tissues, where it is logistically difficult to measure. Shallow water aquatic systems can also face this problem. Scale also greatly affects measurement techniques. The rate of carbon assimilation in plant tissues, organs, whole plants, or plankton samples can be quantified by biochemically based techniques, but these techniques are decidedly inappropriate for large-scale terrestrial field situations. There, net primary production is almost always the desired variable, and estimation techniques involve various methods of estimating dry weight biomass changes over time. Biomass estimates are often converted to an energy measure, such as kilocalories, by an empirically determined conversion factor. Terrestrial. An oak tree, a typical modern, terrestrial autotroph. In terrestrial ecosystems, researchers generally measure net primary production, NPP. Although its definition is straightforward, field measurements used to estimate productivity vary according to investigator and biome. Field estimates rarely account for below-ground productivity, herbivora, turnover, litterfall, volatile organic compounds, root exudates, and allocation to symbiotic microorganisms. Biomass-based NPP estimates result in underestimation of NPP due to incomplete accounting of these components. 9-10, however, many field measurements correlate well to NPP. There are a number of comprehensive reviews of the field methods used to estimate NPP. 9-10-11 Estimates of ecosystem respiration. The total carbon dioxide produced by the ecosystem can also be made with gas flux measurements. The major unaccounted pool is below-ground productivity, especially production and turnover of roots. Below-ground components of NPP are difficult to measure. BNPP below ground NPP is often estimated based on a ratio of ANPP, BNPP above ground NPP, below ground NPP rather than direct measurements. Gross primary production can be estimated from measurements of net ecosystem exchange (NE) of carbon dioxide made by the Eddy covariance technique. During night, this technique measures all components of ecosystem respiration. This respiration is scaled to daytime values and further subtracted from NE. 12. Grasslands. The Kanza tallgrass prairie in the Flint Hills of northeastern Kansas. Most frequently, peak standing biomass is assumed to